Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of Scott Spears Now. We are headed into a presidential election in just about 70 days, and guess what? Trump and Harris are back and forth. RFK Jr. is out of this race. Maybe you don't like either one of these people. Maybe you don't like the Democrat or Republican. Well, guess what? We do have another candidate, a Libertarian candidate for president, who has come here to Marion, Ohio today to join us in the studio for the hour, and we certainly appreciate that. His name is Chase Oliver. Chase, thank you so much for stopping by on the way from Toledo to Columbus.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. It was right on the way there. So traveling across the state, we want to get out to as many people as possible, and of course, we want to speak to the fine folks out here in Marion.
The home of President Harding.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. A good Republican. A good Republican.
One of the good ones.
One of the good ones. Chase, let's start here. What is a libertarian for people who don't know?
So broadly speaking, the Libertarian Party, of course, is the third largest political party in America, and we are rooted in the idea of self-ownership and making government as local as possible, and many times that's your own self-governance. And we really believe that if you're not harming anyone, there should be no need for government to intervene in your life, your business, your values, the way you live your life. We believe in being hands-off, and to that end, we want to keep taxes low, government very limited and transparent, and really let you control your life more than a government will, because you know how best to live. I don't know how best to live. Well, for you anyway. I know how best to live for me.
Now, obviously you believe in laws. What laws do you believe in?
So I am somebody who does believe that we need to have a basic structural framework for our government. I'm what's called a minarchist, so I believe in the minimal amount of government needed. And we do. We have to have a military to protect us from invasion. We do have to have courts to adjudicate disputes between two people, and you do have to have some sort of law enforcement apparatus to basically help people's civil liberties from being violated. But the laws that I want to see on the books are the laws that protect people from force, fraud, coercion, theft, violence. Those are the things that need to be protected. But what we don't need is a whole bunch of regulations and red tape and deciding who decides what, and you can only have something this size, or regulatory codes. All of that is just excess. And what we need to do is get back down to the framework of what we're supposed to be doing, which is protecting people's civil liberties.
You know, it's very interesting. I remember back in 2016, Gary Johnson, I believe, was the Libertarian candidate for president, and he got a lot of traction in that election. I remember, a matter of fact, that there were yard signs here in Marion, Ohio, vote for Gary Johnson. He was polling better than you are at the current point. What has happened in the last 8 years to the Libertarian Party to where it's not as strong in this presidential cycle as it was in 2016?
Well, I think every cycle is different. I think 2016 was unique because you had two extremely unpopular candidates in terms of Trump and Clinton. They were even unpopular many times within their own party. And so you had a lot more people who were looking outside. Right now you have, in the last 8 years, this consolidation around polarization and hyperpartisanship, and it has pushed people into their ideological corners. And part of my job running as a candidate for president in this election cycle is to remind people that they're not limited to two choices, and that if you are dissatisfied, you have a way to make that dissatisfaction known, and that's to vote outside the two-party system. Hopefully we wake more people up, we grow the party apparatus over the next 2 or 4 years to really be something that can compete long-term against the two-party system. That's my main focus. I would, of course, love to win this election, and I'm going to run for the next 75 days or so to win this election. But absent winning it, the victory is in building up our party structure across the country, and I think that's something that I'm uniquely focused on that maybe a Gary Johnson wasn't, and so they kind of came in and then they went out. My goal is to keep them in and maintain them here for the next election cycle so we can have something to grow upon, and that's a difference.
In your heart of hearts, do you believe you're going to be in the White House in January?
Looking at statistics, it's not the most likely outcome. But of course, in this election cycle, well, everybody says, every 4 years, it's the most important election of our lifetime. I don't really believe that. I believe every election is important. I do believe this is the most unique election of our lifetime. We have seen assassination attempts. We've seen candidates dropping out left and right. So anything can happen. I'm going to keep working very hard so that if those conditions are met, I'm going to get elected to the White House. But, it's really hard for a third-party candidate because you have an entire media apparatus and, of course, the Democrats and Republicans doing everything they can to limit our exposure.
What conditions have to be met for you to become president?
Well, I think part of that is voters being able to see us more and more. Debate inclusion would be a huge step towards that. And of course, we're going to keep fighting to be included in the remaining presidential and vice presidential debates, because we think once the voters see us, if they can kick the tires, so to speak, compare our platforms side by side, they're going to see ours as the most attractive platform. And that's the biggest challenge we have, is overcoming that media blackout and that two-party blackout, because they know deep down, as soon as voters hear something different, they're going to say, that's attractive, let's go there. And they'll either have to adapt to be more like us, or they'll lose those votes, and they're scared of doing that.
You know, we all love a good poll, don't we? Especially in presidential years. So this morning, I looked at all the polls, and I took the 5 most recent polls and ran an average. Right now, Harris is averaging 47.4%, Trump 44.8%. Now, Kennedy was still in this because these polls were done before he dropped out yesterday. 3.2%. You're averaging 0.5%, Jill Stein 0.5%, and Cornel West 0 at this point. Now, interestingly enough, since these polls were taken, Kennedy got out. As if we're taping this on a Saturday afternoon, Kennedy got out on Friday, endorsed Donald Trump. Do you think that 3.2% goes to Trump, or do these people end up in your category, possibly?
I think many of the voters are going to end up voting Libertarian, because many of the people who were voting Robert Kennedy were doing so out of a severe dissatisfaction for the way the two-party system works. And even with Kennedy endorsing Trump, I think many of those voters actually maybe lost respect for Kennedy as opposed to gained respect for Donald Trump, and they're going to be looking for an alternative. So I think many of those voters are going to flow into our camp. And I think that's a good thing, because, you know, we want to make sure that voters in Ohio have a chance to have an alternative to the two-party system. I'll be on the ballot, and let me tell you right now, if you want to build an apparatus, getting us to at least 1% or more in Ohio is the great way to continue us being in minor party status, so we can build for the next gubernatorial election here in the state. There are states all over the country with that in mind. So if we can get those votes to flow over, we're going to have some real growth in our party. And I look forward to it, and I'll tell you right now, if you're a Robert Kennedy voter and you can listen to me right now, please check out my campaign. Do not submit yourself to the two-party system.
I also would like to point out, in Ohio, the last poll that was taken, you are averaging in Ohio at 1%. So I'm sure you'd like that to be a little higher, but it is what it's better than national.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the threshold we need to continue ballot access. So we want to build upon that, so we have a really strong showing in November here in Ohio, so that way we can build the conditions to hit the 3% threshold we'll need in 2 years. And so we want to make sure we're leaving both the Libertarian Party of Ohio and the electorate excited for what they can get in the next 2 years.
Now, it's interesting when we look at this poll, even if all of Kennedy's 3.2% of the voting public went to Trump, he would still be only 0.6 above Harris. So Harris has that much of a lead on him with around 70 days to go in this election. What does that say about the two candidates at this point? Why is Harris so far ahead of Trump in the polls?
Simple terms, production value. If you look at the differences between the RNC and the DNC conventions, as I saw this on Twitter, and I will steal the line, the DNC was better produced than the last 5 VMAs, right? It was a star-studded event, it looked exciting, it was well produced, and I think that and the perception of the voter is changing some voters' minds who might be in the middle or feel like, hey, I wasn't excited about the Democrats, maybe I'm more excited now. And so that could be a bit of it, is just I feel like the Democrats are, even though I disagree with them on so much policy, much to do with the Republicans. I disagree with the Republicans on a lot too. But I think I can admit that one side is marketing themselves a little more relatably than, say, the other. And I think that's going to be the difference for some voters. And especially for voters who are, low propensity. They're not looking at they're not digging into the policy background. They're just saying who makes them feel good. And for those voters, that might be why they're falling more for Harris than Trump.
With these polls and Kennedy out now, who do you predict will win this election? Now, obviously, you want yourself to win,
yes,
and obviously, you hope that happens. But if you had to give an honest prediction, who would win this election?
Well, I think if you're looking at the major party candidates and kind of where momentum is flowing, I am seeing a momentum flow to Harris. Now, we have 75 days left. That could certainly flow back. But if a snapshot election were held today, I would predict Harris would likely win, just based on what we're seeing coming out of the polling and what we're seeing coming out of states, especially swing states. Now, of course, you're right. I'd like to win this election. I'd like to earn enough votes to really cause chaos all over the country. I'd love to be blamed by whoever loses for the reason they lose. That would be wonderful for me. But yeah, if I were to snapshot it right now, it looks like Harris has the momentum going into the election.
Now, that's a very interesting point, and I want to spend some time on this, because that is the rap on third-party candidates, that you will cost somebody the election. We said it about Ralph Nader with Al Gore. We said it about George Bush with Ross Perot. It's said a lot. Hillary said it about Gary Johnson and Jill Stein back in 2016. And interestingly enough, you did run for Senate in 2022 in Georgia. And I'm just going to read this so I have the story right. After becoming the Libertarian nominee for the 2022 U.S. Senate election in Georgia, you faced off against incumbent Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker. And in that election, you got 2% of the popular vote, and they called you the spoiler that got Warnock in. Do you believe that?
No. Well, first off, I think the two-party system itself is spoiled really bad. It's something that's just so terrible. And if you look at approval ratings versus re-election rates, you know the system is broken. Congress has less than 20% approval, but more than 90% re-election rates. So that system itself is already flawed and broken. So nothing I can do can spoil it or make it any worse than it already is. All I can do is highlight the failures of our democracy, the fact that we have plurality voting, and that leads to people with under 50% of the vote being elected to represent 100% of a population. And that's not even like tyranny of the majority, that's tyranny of the minority. And so we want to get back to having a more well-rounded voting system, ranked choice voting, that actually allows voters to pick their choice first and then feel comfortable with like whoever their lesser of two evil is second on the ballot. And I think we change the way we vote, we'd have a more representative democracy. And ultimately, I'm a disruptor of both parties. I'm bringing in voters into my tent that would normally be voting either Republican or Democrat, but the largest pool is independent voters who would stay home if there wasn't a Libertarian on the ballot. So I don't think I'm spoiling anything, and in fact, the Democrats, Hillary Clinton can blame Gary Johnson all she wants. The truth is Hillary Clinton didn't win the election. She didn't deliver. Same as 4 years ago. Joe Biden or Donald Trump can blame Joe Jorgensen. We'll take that blame and we'll run with it. But the truth is he didn't run a good enough campaign to beat Joe Biden. That's not Joe Jorgensen's fault, and it won't be my fault if Harris or Trump wins. I'm contributing to this conversation and bringing new voters in. And that scares the Democrats or Republicans.
And I think here's the problem with that argument, I think, with most people, and it's the Kennedy argument that just happened 24 hours ago. It's that his vice president, Nicole Shanahan, went out and said, we're going to hand this election to Kamala Harris if we don't get out. Trump campaign, if you offer RFK a position, RFK Jr. will endorse you. We're not going to hand this over now to Kamala Harris. That's what happened.
Well, I think, the polling conditions might be different for RFK. And, maybe he had polling from more people who would put Trump second place on a ranked choice ballot than Harris. And maybe that's what they're seeing. But in my last Senate race, polling showed that I polled as many self-identified Republicans as self-identified Democrats. And the largest pool was that independent voter, many of whom said they just wouldn't vote. That's the real voter that you want to get in between, because both Democrats and Republicans have their kind of ideological core base. It's that large swath of independent voters. And maybe Shanahan thinks that if they get out of the race, it helps Trump. I would argue actually a lot of Kennedy's supporters were people who were traditionally Democrats who just weren't thrilled about Joe Biden and they wanted a better choice. And now, faced between Trump and Harris, I think a lot of them are honestly either going to break for me or for Harris. I don't see it as like a clean move that 3% right into Trump's column. I just don't think that's going to happen, and I think the polling really doesn't show that out. So maybe Shanahan it's more wishful thinking on her part than realistic thinking.
Has this hurt the idea of third parties, at least in this election cycle, because he was polling better than any third party candidate by far, and now he's basically endorsed the Republican candidate with 75 days to go?
Yeah, well, what I think it does is it does make voters kind of maybe question about why that happened and what's the value of the vote. I urge you to understand the value of voting outside of the two-party system is not just voting for your candidate, but it's voting to build up a party or a structure that can grow in the long term. And so if you feel discouraged, if you feel like, hey, I have to settle for one of the two, you don't have to settle. Let's be real. No matter who wins between Harris and Trump, we're going to be divided. We're going to be hyper-partisan. We're going to see debts and deficits grow, and wars are not going to end around the world. We're still going to be militarizing ourselves around the world. So a lot is not going to change. If you want real change, big change, substantive change, I urge you to vote outside the two-party system. It's the best case to make for actually breaking down something that so many people are dissatisfied with. And yeah, maybe it makes a couple people think twice, but I really think in the long run, having candidates that go through November and beyond continue to organize, that's what's going to hold the third-party system together, and that's what I'm committed to doing. Is I'm not going anywhere. And so if you want to vote outside the two-party system, you have a choice.
Do you think that Trump had to do this the way the polls are and what has been going on in the last month? He had to make this deal with Kennedy. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have to offer him anything. He didn't have to make the deal to get the endorsement. Do you think at this point he had to do it?
I think a little bit of it is he saw the momentum of Harris and he kind of is feeling desperate, especially if you look at the past things that Donald Trump has said about Robert Kennedy. He's more left than Joe Biden. He's an ultra-liberal. He's a big government goon. He wants to do this. He wants to do that. If you look at the past statements that Robert Kennedy has made about Donald Trump, he's terrible. He's an authoritarian. He wants to tear down the rule of law. He doesn't care about the Constitution. But yet these two men feel desperate enough to come together. I think that's a sign of momentum from the Democrats that makes both of them scared. And for me, I have to just say, Democrat or Republican, I'm not going to be happy with either one of them winning the election. And so I might as well just stay in this race and keep running as a libertarian and providing people a libertarian option.
If we got to the final 10 days and you really felt that you being in was going to hand this to one candidate or the other, would you consider getting out?
Nope, not at all. That door is closed for me. I've committed to myself, to my supporters, to my party that I'm going to be this nominee through November. And when I signed on the dotted line, when I won that nomination and I filled out that nomination paperwork, that was a contract that I made with my voters, my supporters, and I will never ever leave that for the purposes of political expediency. If people feel like I might be costing an election, well, then people need to vote for somebody else. But there are people who want to vote Libertarian, who want to vote third party, and for me to get out would be just letting them down. And so no, I don't feel like there's any urge for me to do that, and there certainly wouldn't be on my part. That door is way closed.
We have never had a female president. That has become a big deal in this election, even with independents. Probably the most famous living independent is Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota, obviously where Governor Walz is from and currently the governor. But Jesse Ventura, who says in his 70-plus years of life, he has never voted for a Democrat or a Republican, never endorsed a Democrat or a Republican, and won his election as an independent in Minnesota, now has endorsed Harris, and his main reason for that is, I want to live to see a woman president. I think they're better equipped to handle the abortion issue, and basically, we men have screwed it up. Let's see how a woman would do it.
Well, far be it for me to disparage Jesse Ventura, but I think that's a bad reason to vote for somebody. I want to vote for somebody based on their policy, what they're going to do. If they happen to be a woman, that's great, and it's great for representation to see more women in politics. But I'm not going to vote for anybody just because they're a woman, or just because they're a certain race, or a religion, or a background. I want to vote for somebody based on who they are. But if you want to play that game, you could vote for the first LGBTQ person to be in the White House if you vote for me. If that's important for you to break barriers and break history, I suppose you could say that. But I wouldn't want anybody to vote for me just because I'm the gay candidate. I would want people to vote for me because I'm the best candidate. And that's, to me, is what's important. So, if that's the explanation Governor Ventura is giving, I would urge him to really kick the tires and look at the policies. Maybe he comes up with the same conclusion, but I would hate for him to be the reason he votes outside of the two-party system for the first time. It's because he wants to see a lady in charge. He had an opportunity to vote for a lady 4 years ago. He could have done that for Jo Jorgensen, but I didn't vote for Jo Jorgensen in 2020 because she was a woman. I voted because I thought she was the best choice. And that's what I'm urging voters to do. Don't think about, literally blind taste test our policies. Look at us with an unbiased eye. And I think most voters would find they're far more libertarian than they realize. But they don't do it because they want to vote for the woman, or they are scared that so-and-so is going to win. Dare to be different. Dare to be different in this election and watch how things change.
It's very interesting you bring that up. I guess they call that identity politics. Certainly we have Jesse Ventura is talking about being a woman, Kamala Harris, and certainly we have heard about African American. We heard about it, I think, more with Barack Obama, but it certainly is creeping in here. We certainly heard about age. I think that drove Joe Biden out of this election. You've talked about being gay just moments ago, but it's not really out there a lot. Do you think you should use that more often? Heaven knows in politics, people use everything. You are gay. Why not use it more often?
Well, I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud of my community. I was just at a pride parade today, marching as the first LGBTQ candidate across the country. But I don't feel the need to lead with that, because I think if I did that, I would be doing a disservice to my community just saying, well, only vote for me because I'm gay. There are gay people across the political spectrum who believe lots of different things. Voting for the gay candidate doesn't mean you're voting for the liberal candidate or conservative candidate. You don't know anything about that belief other than the fact that this is a man who likes men, right? And so for me, I'm happy to be a representative of my community. I'm happy to fight for the rights of my community. I am wearing a Stonewall t-shirt right now speaking about the gay rights movement. But I don't feel the need to, quote-unquote, lead with that. I lead on the policies that I think are important to the average voter, those kitchen table issues, because that's really what's most important to the voter. They don't care who their president loves. They care that their president is going to fight for them and their family.
Do you think there are people who maybe would say he's gay, I'm not going to vote for him?
There probably are people like that. I imagine there are people who are like that with just about anybody else, and I've certainly experienced homophobia in my life, so I don't think that there's the 0% chance that someone's going to not vote for me because I'm gay. I'm sure there are people who are doing that, and again, I would urge them to think past about my identity and really look at my policies. I'd love to earn your vote, but if you're not going to vote for me out of hatred or spite, well, then I'm sorry, I'm not going to earn your vote, and I guess you're just going to have to kick rocks.
Jesse Ventura said that he believes a woman is better equipped to deal with the issue of abortion, which certainly has become a hot topic in this country. Being a gay candidate and a gay man, are you equipped to deal with certain things better than others?
I don't really believe that. Maybe I have insight into certain ways of life, like being a gay man. I kind of have insight to the LGBTQ experience that can inform me. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be a better legislator or a negotiator or somebody who can get legislation across the line and sign into law. That requires skills that are absent of just me being gay. I'd have to be somebody who can work with people, get in the room, negotiate, actually do the work of governing, and that is not dependent on your sex, your gender, your sexual orientation, your faith expression, or anything. That has to do with you as a person and like what kind of interpersonal skills do you have. I don't think being a woman necessarily makes you any better to argue any policy point. But of course, being a woman does provide you insight into the idea of women's health and women's reproductive issues. I don't have a uterus. I will never know what it feels like to have a uterus. But I will always fight for the right of women to control their own body, even if I don't have the necessary insight into what they are going through instinctively. I can still fight for their rights. Doesn't mean I would be any less capable of doing that.
I've asked you many times, if you couldn't vote for yourself and had to vote for one of the two candidates, who would you vote for? You, at one point, did say Biden. We have it on tape, but you said maybe that was a moment you didn't realize what you were saying at the time. You have never said Harris or Trump. But if people listen to you on gay rights, LGBTQ rights, on abortion, certainly, it seems as if you were an Obama guy. It lists that everywhere in 2008. Mm-hmm. It seems you line up more, certainly, with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party.
Well, maybe based on the policies that we've discussed here in this interview, but if we get onto things like gun rights, I'm certainly going to be disagreeing with nearly every Democrat. I'm an absolutionist. I believe in removing all existing gun laws. I say if the government can own the gun, you should be able to own the gun. When it comes to taxes in the economy, I want to see ourselves completely balancing the budget, reducing the impact of taxation across the board. I'm a big free marketer. I don't believe in kind of centrally planning economic decisions. I believe in decentralizing those decisions to the free market. And those areas are areas where I certainly maybe would line up more along maybe the Republican policy prescription. But the truth is libertarianism is kind of something wholly different from both of those, which is why, the gun to my head question, I always say the gun would go off. Because while there might be one or two policy areas where I line up with one or the other, if you look at the whole kit and caboodle of everything that they've put together, then neither of them are attractive to me. In fact, it's more useful for me to just stay at home and organize my own community and do activism work outside of elective politics if I'm left with a choice as a Republican or a Democrat, which is why I think we need to open this process up, even for people who are more left than me, who want to be a Green Party candidate, or if you're more right than me, you want to be a Constitution Party guy. You should have that choice, and you shouldn't be limited to these two corporatized parties. Which to me, there's just no good choice, because even if you're a libertarian and you go into the Democratic Party, you become more Democratic. They don't get more libertarian. Same with the Republicans. You can be a Rand Paul and you can try to make the party more libertarian. They make you more Republican. And so for me, it's just a bad bet either way for me.
Why has a third party candidate never won? I mean, we have had former presidents. Teddy Roosevelt was a third party candidate. Ross Perot did well, didn't win any states. Did okay in the popular vote, I think over 20% of the popular vote. Ralph Nader was known for a long, long time, didn't do well at all. Why is it so hard?
I think part of it is the voters are conditioned to really feel like there's only two visible, quote-unquote, viable choices, and that is a huge barrier that we have to get over. We have to break through that psychological block in the voters' minds that they have to pick one or the other. It's one of the reasons I'm so interested in reaching out to young voters, because I want them to pull a lever for somebody who's not a Republican or a Democrat in their first election. Because if you do it in the first one, for the rest of the elections, you'll say, who else is on the ballot? Who else is running? And they'll be more informed voters. voters. And so I think the biggest thing is just getting over that psychological block. And then, of course, the way we vote. Plurality voting encourages a two-party system and actually silos this into a two-party system. And so if we had ranked choice voting or approval voting in more states, we would certainly see more people feeling comfortable to step out of that two-party system and into something else. And so that's the work we have to do in the off years of the elections. We run in the elections as candidates during these election years, but my job after November 5th, if I'm not president-elect, of course, is to start working towards organizing more and more states to adopt ranked choice voting, to adopt ballot access laws that make it easier to run alternative candidates without spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on a ballot access drive. Those are the steps we're going to have to take to really overcome the two-party hurdles.
One of the reasons that people in general believe that third-party candidacies hurt the two major candidates and maybe cost somebody an election, depending on what year it is and who it is, I think is because of those issues we were just speaking about. Everybody wants to know in a presidential year where you stand on gay marriage. Even though that affects a very small portion of the entire population, you gotta know where the candidate stands on that. Abortion, same thing. Very few people on the whole are actually going to be faced with having an abortion in society, but we have to know that. I bet you know I bet the people watching this or listening to this, they know where Trump stands on that. They know where Harris stands on those issues. I bet they don't know Trump and Harris's policy issues. I bet if you asked them about Israel or Iran or Palestine or even their economic thoughts, the money thresholds, people they're going to give tax breaks to, people they're not. I bet they couldn't hit that, but they certainly know gay marriage. They certainly know abortion.
Oh yeah, well, there are certain issues that are very, very black and white to many voters. I think abortion is the biggest one in this election. I've spoken to many women voters as I've traveled across the country, and oftentimes the first question they have is, how do you feel about abortion rights? And when I say I'm pro-choice, you literally see like their body language relax, and they're like, okay, now I can keep talking to you because I had a defensive barrier up, because if you were about to say you're going to regulate my body, I was about to completely dismiss you. I think there are certain issues that are like that with the voters and with certain voters, and they become almost single issue voters until they find out there's a third party candidate that aligns with them on that main issue, and then they can compare the other issues that are maybe not super important to them or not the sole decider of whether I'm going to like or not like this politician. And so, I'm certainly somebody, libertarians are pro make your own choice about your own life for the most part. We do have some pro-life libertarians in the movement, but by and large, across this policy spectrum, it's, hey man, make your own choice, just don't hurt anybody.
I remember in 2008, and you were an Obama guy in 2008, that there were Republicans, after the election was over and all the money was spent and all the ads were done and all the debates were over, that after he was elected, it was historic. And they were okay with it. And they came out and said, this is a good thing that this has happened, that it's not a white man. After all this time, this has happened. And a lot of people said, I never thought I would live to see the day that this would happen. A lot of people feel that way about a woman. If you don't win, if Harris does win, maybe because of the issue you just described, abortion being such a passionate issue about people, if you wake up on November the 6th and Harris has won the election because this country has elected a woman, no matter which woman, no matter which party, will you go, some progress has been made here?
Yeah, I think you can recognize the history of something even if I don't vote for that candidate. I can recognize that it's kind of history making to have a woman in charge. 4 years ago we had the same thing with Kamala being elected as the VP. It was the first time we've ever had a woman serving in the White House as president or vice president. And so certainly you can recognize the history. You can note that without, and you don't have to hate on somebody or fully support somebody for that. So for me, yeah, I'm going to recognize the history if that occurs, and I'm going to hope that we can get a libertarian woman one day elected president next.
It's very interesting. We've got a little bit of time left here. We've got a whole other half of the program left, but I want to talk a little bit more about Kamala Harris, because a month ago, I don't even know if the majority of the country could have pronounced her name correctly or was even sure who she was. She was one of the most anonymous vice presidents I've ever seen in my lifetime. Wasn't even sure she was going to get the nomination. Thought this was going to go to a brokered convention if Joe Biden did get out. And then all of a sudden, Joe Biden steps out and she breaks Obama's fundraising records. She gets the delegates within a day and a half that she needs. She has got people in Ohio, which is a very Trump state. In 2 days, 11,000 more people for the Democratic Party showed up to volunteer. We have got a convention which has thrown her in the lead in the polls. She came from a Joe Biden 8% deficit to beating Trump in the polls by 3% in a month. And I'm going to ask you what it is about her, because you have to recognize that she's done something. Something has been struck here, but we got to take a break. It's called a hard break here, and we're going to come back with Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president, on the other side of this short but important break. Back here with Libertarian candidate for president, Chase Oliver, and before we went to break, I was talking about, and people are using the term phenomenon, and you would have to say that Kamala Harris has become in the last 30 days. I went to a watch party here, covered it as media, in Marion, Ohio, the city of President Harding, the district of Jim Jordan, the state of J.D. Vance. People were showing up, 50, 60 people, to watch her acceptance speech. What is it about her?
Well, I think if we really want to look at what it is that caused so much enthusiasm to hit the Democratic Party all at once, it's like a dam that broke, and that dam was Joe Biden. That dam of enthusiasm, Democrats were not excited. They were like marching into the Democratic convention fully defeated. And they felt after that first, particularly that first debate, if you notice, the fundraising for Joe Biden completely dried up, everything stopped, and they said, until you give us something better, we're not going to go there. And as soon as they gave you somebody else, Kamala, I think that's when that dam burst and you saw a lot of enthusiasm drifting through. Now, can that enthusiasm last the next 75 days? How long does the honeymoon phase happen? Because shiny and new is very fun to the electorate. But once you start keying in, that's going to be the thing we're going to have to look at as, you as a journalist and me as a candidate and us as voters. We're going to see, is that enthusiasm going to play out over the next 75 days, or will it start to stall? Will it start to slow? Will Trump start to catch back up? These are the kind of back and forth things you see in these elections. And I recognize that much of this also might be how quickly the party came around. They did this 4 years ago with Joe Biden. You had the Bernie Sanders and you had a bunch of other candidates, and immediately they all dropped out at the same time, coalesced behind Joe Biden and pushed him. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Kamala Harris, is the establishment said, Biden is out, we're just going to push Kamala. And they pushed very hard, and the Democratic electorate responded to it. And so to me, that's what we're seeing, is that dam breaking of the Joe Biden lack of enthusiasm, combined with so many big party players, the Obamas, the Pelosi's, these people got behind Kamala. And so that was a signifier to the Democratic base. Okay, now it's exciting. Now it's new. And of course, her being 20 years younger, being a woman, like there are things that are exciting that electorate more than, say, a Joe Biden would be. Like, I can only imagine how different. Think to yourselves, people. Think to yourselves. Close your eyes and think about, what would that convention have looked like last week if it had been Joe Biden's convention?
Well, and that's an interesting point. Hillary did not have this kind of financial support and this kind of enthusiasm in the polls. Joe Biden in 2020 won the presidency with a pretty good size margin in the Electoral College. And yet, I remember the morning he was elected, people said, journalists got together and said, this was more about, do we want Trump to stay in, or do we not want Trump to stay in? And if you didn't want him to stay in, you voted for Biden, and that's what happened. It doesn't seem to be that way this time. I'm sure these people don't want Trump, but there actually seems to be an enthusiasm for Kamala Harris.
What I see a lot more of is certainly not wanting to see Trump return. That's why.
Why is he so divisive?
Well, I think part of it is he's a chaos agent. He's unpredictable. He is somebody whose policy prescription is based on whoever whispered into his ear last with a quote-unquote good idea. And that kind of chaos and unpredictability scares voters a lot of the time. I think you have to be consistent and principled as to give them something to fight for. He's always about, what are we fighting against? And so that's why so many voters are very divisive on him. I agree with much of that, because I want to know where somebody's going to stand before I vote for them, and not, hey, is somebody going to whisper a good idea and that's great. Well, I was before I was against it, kind of a thing. And that's that unpredictability that I have a real issue with. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, because I don't know where he's going to stand on any day of the week.
Are you a fan of Kamala Harris at all?
Not her policies. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I'm sure she's got a great family. And that's the other thing that I think is ridiculous, is the fact that the Trump side of things are coming after family members. Ridiculous, particularly the Wallses. We see Governor Walls' son. Nobody did that to Barron Trump. People had the respect not to bring people's family into it. So I'm not a big fan of most of her policies. I'm sure she's a nice person, but of course anybody who's at that level in politics has got to be a little crazy. A little bit of a sociopath. I'm just going to be fair.
But now you are.
Well, I'm.
Are you a sociopath?
Well,
Because
I'm
a
not
little bit of a sociopath.
Well, I'm a. If they're 50%, I'm at 1%. Like we can just do the math there. But I think anybody who runs at any level for president, I'll include myself in this. You have to have a little bit of ego. You have to have a little bit of, hey, I got the best ideas. I'm going to move them forward. Now, I'm lucky that I have such an awesome political philosophy as libertarianism, because it's very easy for me to say I got the best. I don't even have to be the best communicator. We got the best ideas. But yeah, everybody has to have a little bit of ego to run. And yeah, I'm not a fan of either of the policies, but I'm sure these people are nice people and they love their families and they're human beings. We got to give them that human respect.
You're under 40 years old. If you don't win this election, if one of these campaigns offered you a job, might you consider it?
Well, honestly, engaging in the hypotheticals, would honestly depend on the job, what I think I could get done doing there. But I don't think either are going to be keen to give me a job, because most of what I'm going to do is tear down whatever department they're going to put me in. Maybe there's somebody that wants me to do that, to go in like a wrecking ball. But I'd certainly have to think about it, what can you do to affect change in this country in a positive direction? Is it better for me to serve in an administration or be an activist outside, a political organizer? A lot of things to weigh there.
Will you stay in the Libertarian Party running for office? Will you stay in politics?
Oh, I'm absolutely going to stay involved in the Libertarian Party, continue to build our party up over the long run. And, if running under 40 doesn't work, I'll just wait 40 years and run as an 80-year-old, and that seems to be working in this country a lot more and more. So, I can just
we'll find out Election Day.
Exactly.
We got one 80-year-old, close to 80-year-old left. The other one, not so much anymore. But would you run for office again?
Yeah, it's something that I would think about. Somebody asked me, are you going to run for president in 2028? I said, let me finish running for president in 2024 before we answer those questions. But I think that door is always open. I think we've created a powerful campaign organization. I have an amazing staff of people that if they were to want to do this with me again in 2 or 4 or however many years, it'd be really hard for me to say no to them if the people come a-calling.
So you do it again?
Yeah.
Let's talk about religion. Religion's a big deal. Donald Trump talks a lot about his religion at this particular point. Harris, I believe, has talked some about her religion. I don't think as much, but maybe that's because she hasn't been in as long. Certainly we know what Joe Biden's faith is. What's your faith? What's your religious background?
So I'm an Episcopalian, but I grew up as a child in the evangelical church. So my parents were kind of old school Baptist-style evangelicals. But then about 5 or 6 years ago, I met with some folks in the Episcopalian church, and really a lot of that spoke to me. It is more my kind of style of faith. I feel very comfortable in that church, and they're very affirming for LGBTQ people, so I finally felt like I didn't have to maybe hide one part of my identity to be part of another, which was a big conflict in my, just you kind of have a hole in your heart when you feel that way. And so now I feel fully embraced by my church. I feel fully comfortable with my faith, and I'm happy to speak about the power of the Christian faith to anybody who wants to hear it. I usually don't too much in the realm of politics because I think people have their own faith journey, but one-on-one, I'm happy to talk to people about the beautiful and powerful love of Jesus Christ.
Do you believe in a heaven and a hell?
Yes.
An actual place?
Yeah, I believe there is something that happens after we die. I do.
Very. And somebody who is gay, LGBTQ, would go to heaven?
Yes, I do. I believe as long as you have a heart that is meant to help others, an empathic heart, and doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, that is the most important thing. And truly, we are all a reflection of God. In my opinion, we are all made in God's image, whether you're gay, straight, cis, or trans. So long as you live with love in your heart and you try to push that forward, I think that's what's most important to God.
Give me a sentence to sum up each of the following people. Joe Biden.
Joe Biden is the politics of yesteryear. He is the status quo in an 80-year-old body.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris represents a leftward shift in politics. She is somebody who wants to harness the power of the Democratic Party for central planning purposes.
Tim Walz.
Tim Walz is a Midwest guy with very left politics. He's probably a very charming person to have dinner with, but I would disagree with him on a lot of the issues.
J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance is somebody who is of my generation, and I feel a little camaraderie there. But when it comes to the substance and style, I think there's big differences between me and him in terms of the type of people we are.
Jill Stein.
Jill Stein is America's well-meaning, environmentally kooky aunt. I love her. She's a very nice person. I disagree with her on so many politics, but I've always welcomed being on a debate stage with her, and she's someone who's always been honest about how she feels.
Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Bobby Kennedy Jr. is is somebody who was born on third base and thought they hit a triple. And I do believe that a lot of that comes from the political dynastism. I'm sure he's also a nice guy. He fought for the environment, but he is definitely a world-class Nepo baby.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is a chaos agent. He is somebody who is most important constituency is the constituency of one, and that is Donald Trump. And as long as you keep that in mind, when you see the way he acts, it becomes a little bit more understandable.
Chase Oliver.
I am a 39-year-old regular working person who's had to grow up in this economy and is continuing to fight for better ways for us to live more free and more prosperous in the United States of America.
You know, I think when people hear you describe those people, I think that's why people deep down, even if you don't say it, are thinking that if you had to vote for one of these people, you would vote for Harris. Because you seem a little more favorable, maybe not policy-wise, but you seem a little bit more... I can like that person. I don't think they're a chaos agent. I don't think that they're a selfish person. I think that's why people probably believe that, even if you don't say it.
Yeah, well, you know, what I can say is...
You'd probably sleep a little better if Harris got elected than Trump, I think is what most people would say.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to sleep well either way, unfortunately. And what I would say is yeah, I call one status quo and one a chaos agent. I think the status quo is just as bad as chaos because the status quo has been pretty terrible. And for me, I want to see a positive movement forward. I don't get that out of anybody. And I know Harris, says joy a million times, but I'm not feeling the joy of raising taxes, more environmental regulations and red tape, continued support for the warfare state around the world, particularly both in Ukraine and Gaza. Like, there's a lot of things that don't spark joy in me from Kamala Harris, even if, socially I might agree with some of the issues that are more left-leaning. And I think those are the ones that I really want outside the realm of government. If you're pro or against gay marriage personally, as long as you're not using the government, it shouldn't bother me. And maybe that's...
So you don't want the government to say gay marriage is okay?
Theoretically, as a libertarian, I wouldn't want marriage to be through the state. If I could have a perfect world and wave a magic wand, that should be a contract between two people. You shouldn't have to have the state enforcing that. But so long as the state's going to be involved in marriage, any two consenting people should be able to enter into that agreement.
Doesn't that become a problem, though, on the biggest issue? You said you feel that people care about this election, abortion, because if the government was not involved, I guess, yes, people could still get them, would be the idea, but there would be no regulation, and there would possibly be clinics that were not operated properly, medically.
Yeah, well, and I think in that situation, you of course want to enshrine the right to an abortion, but when you remove the regulatory framework, what you're doing is you're moving that away from the central planning framework into the realm of the free market. And I think if there are clinics who are not operating up to par, who are not operating well, you sue them for medical malpractice, and when you remove tort caps, you can bankrupt those organizations, creating a self-interest motive for them to actually act better. And that would ultimately be a better way to regulate these people by bankrupting the bad ones and seeing the best practices being adopted without needing to have a central government to do it. But ultimately, you do want to enshrine the right to an abortion because it is bodily autonomy, in my opinion, and that has to be defended from infringement from government.
What issue is most important to you in this election?
The most important issue to me is the economy and inflation, because I see trillions of dollars a year being added every single year, and there's no halt to it, and nobody is sounding the alarm the way we need to. And if we continue to build up this debt and deficit crisis, it's going to burst. And when that bubble bursts, it's going to be when our kids and grandkids are just getting started in the economy. And that's what makes me fear the most, is right as I'm getting ready to retire and right as my nephews and nieces are getting into the working world, our economy goes completely belly up due to a debt crisis. That, to me, terrifies me. More than any social issue, more than any other domestic policy issue, we have to stop spending trillions of dollars more a year. We have to sound this alarm. Otherwise, we're headed, right off a cliff. And trust me, when you drive off a cliff, there's not much chance of survival. And so we have to hit the brakes now, hard and quick. And we have to sound the alarm. And yes, it will cause pain. It will cause pain. We can't lie about that. But it would have caused less pain if we had done it 20 years ago. It will cause more pain if we wait to do it 20 years from now. And so we have to sound the alarm.
Where do you cut the budget?
You cut the budget starting with the military-industrial complex, cutting out all the excess military spending you don't need, and then you have to address entitlements. You have to address Social Security and Medicare and get those costs down or eliminate them altogether in the long run, because that is the highest driver of inflation. And if you can't touch the entitlements, the third rail, then you can't be really serious about balancing the budget. And yeah, it's called the third rail for a reason. Maybe some people don't vote me for this, but we have to put the ideas out there. If we're not, we're doing a disservice to the voter.
Who gets food stamps? Who doesn't get food stamps? Who gets welfare? Who doesn't get welfare? How do you cut that? How do you make that decision?
Well, here's the thing. I want people to have help. And I think this is the biggest misconception about libertarians. Because we don't want the government to do something, people think we don't want it done. I do want to help those who are less fortunate. I do want to provide food and shelter to those who need it. I just think running that through a bureaucratic system of government is about the most inefficient way to get that done. They'll take $1 out of your pocket, and by the time you get it back, it's a dime. I would much rather that money be organized and allocated within the free market of charities, nonprofits, organizations, and NGOs to actually do the work, as opposed to funneling that through a centralized bureaucratic system. I want to help people. I think your dollar goes further to help somebody in need when you spend that dollar, as opposed to having it taxed out of your pocket and just saying, oh, well, the government will handle it.
If everybody who was on food stamps or the food card or EBT or however people want to describe it now showed up at a church or showed up just at somebody's house for a donation, I don't know that that would work.
I think over the long haul, we can transition ourselves to that. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't flip a switch. This is why things have to be gradual, much like my Social Security plan. I want to get rid of Social Security for younger workers like myself who see the Ponzi scheme and know they're not going to get benefits even if they pay in. But I don't want to get rid of Social Security for my parents and grandparents who are living on that fixed income right now. You have to make this a gradual step. We didn't get to tyranny in one step. We didn't get to central planning in one step. We move ourselves back one step at a time. And, I can see the North Star, but also recognize where my feet are and where I have to go. And that's the things that libertarians have to reconcile. You can be an idealist, but you also have to recognize there's pragmatic steps to get there, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so yeah, if we flip the switch overnight, there'd be a lot more pain than there would be if we gradually get ourselves off of this. And that's the best way to wean ourselves away with the least amount of pain possible.
So many people talk about the end of Social Security, and it's been going now since the 1940s, and it hasn't stopped. It hasn't went away. There haven't been reductions in it. People do get the raises, the cost of living. There is HUD housing for seniors. Why do we keep saying that when there really has been no indication that it is going to go away? I mean, good Lord, people were saying in the 70s that it was going to be long gone by now.
Yeah,
and in the 90s they were saying it, certainly.
So here's why. It's because right now the Social Security trust is empty. It's been wiped away. What we're doing when we're paying out Social Security benefits is not based on what was collected 30 or 40 years ago. It's coming out of the Treasury right now. It's deficit spending every single year. And the longer we keep this program alive, the more and more that's going to eat up the debt and deficit and continue to grow. And so eventually when our economy goes completely belly up, that will be something that we're not going to be able to maintain. We're not going to be able to continue to maintain the level of benefits that we're having right now. And so we can either drive into the brick wall or we can start turning the car in a different direction. And so that's the two options that we ultimately have. And whether it happens in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, it's going to happen. We are going to blow up the debt bubble enough to where it bursts. And part of that is driving that right now is entitlements, is Social Security, because it's not like we have a Social Security piggy bank and that's what we're paying out right now. We already filled that piggy bank full of IOUs, and now we're writing other IOUs out of other parts of the Treasury. And so yeah, it keeps going, but it's not going because the trust is keeping it going. It's going because deficit spending from DC is keeping it going. And that's printing trillions of out of thin air and devaluing the dollar that's in your pocket today.
Is immigration a big issue for you?
Immigration is a big issue, and I think not just for me, but for the voters. We have a crisis at our southern border. It's not caused by government, though. It's caused by government's inefficiency to be able to properly move labor through the process. I want a 21st century Ellis Island. Come to this country through a port of entry, declare who you are, submit to a background check. You should be able to get documentation to work. If you're already here without documentation, go to a post office, sign up, go through the background check process, and get certified. After a set period of time, anybody that's not certified obviously doesn't want to be. They're here for a reason that's nefarious. Let them be deported. But for 99.9% of people, they just want to work. They just want to come here and create their American dream, and we should facilitate that.
You were born under President Ronald Reagan. Reagan to Biden, best president in your lifetime.
Well, I said this the other day. Actually, you asked me who was my favorite living president, and then you asked me who was my favorite president of my lifetime. I answered two different things, but both of them, I think, it's kind of a combination between 41 Bush and Clinton. I think part of the reason why I would answer that is because Clinton had a Republican Congress that was pushing him to cut debts and deficits. And so merely for the most important issue to me, inflation and debt and deficits, I would have to say Clinton because he's the last one to have balanced a budget.
Okay.
Even if I felt like he did it through tax increases and not cuts, but that's still better than debts and deficits. So just on that alone, I would have to say he's probably the most effective I've had.
When you saw Clinton the other night all in on Harris, what'd you think?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, he's playing the party game, and, he's going to be the good Democrat, and I don't think I could have the exact same policy prescription as Bill Clinton had in 1992, and he would still pick Kamala Harris over me because he's a good Democrat, and that's what he's going to do. But for me, he's just another sign of politics of the past, too. I mean,
see, I don't know about that, though, anymore, because look at the Pelosi-Biden relationship. That's certainly not all in on the Democrats anymore. They have fractured a friendship that was 50 years long at this point.
Yeah, that's true. But I think
the party certainly didn't line up behind Mr. Democrat Joe Biden.
Yeah, and I think they were until that first debate. That was the thing. That was the
so
difference.
There are deal breakers.
Well, yeah, they got to see firsthand exactly how he debated, and they said, "Oh, we're in trouble here." But until that day, everybody was fully on board with Joe Biden, and so I think. Bill Clinton's just doing his job as a Democratic ex-president. He's got to go up there. It would have been weird if he weren't there.
I didn't ask you this the other day. Worst president in your lifetime?
Worst president in my lifetime, I'm still going to go with George W. Bush. He created the war on terror. He passed the Patriot Act. He passed the privacy attacks that we're still feeling these days. He ran up deficits just like anybody else. He wanted to pass a constitutional amendment to prevent me from getting married one day, which as a Christian, I want to find a husband and I want to raise a family, and that directly affected me. So I'm still going to go with George W. Bush, and that's going to be a hard one to beat, especially with Dick Cheney as a VP.
Now the polls, now he's for gay marriage. Now his daughter.
Well, Dick Cheney, there's a lot of reasons to hate Dick Cheney and that have nothing to do with gay marriage.
Okay.
That's the
on that particular issue, he wasn't preventing.
And I say broken clocks are right, twice a day.
Okay. So when we look at this whole thing, the historians, every President's Day, in your lifetime, would say the best president is Barack Obama and the worst president is Trump. So your answer doesn't line up with either one of those. Why do you think?
Maybe it's a little recency bias. I think people just don't remember exactly what it was like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and they think, who's the most recent one I didn't like, or the most recent one that I did like, and that's why it's kind of following that direction. But
does Trump get a bad rep? Is it because he's still out there and running, he's not as bad as everybody says he is? Because he goes in the bottom when they do these polls.
Oh, he's pretty terrible. Make no mistake, policy-wise and the debts. And if we're running on debts and deficits, he spent more in one single year than any president ever has. And he ran more debt in 4 years than any president has in a 4-year period. Even without COVID, he was still running massive deficits. And so, no, I think he deserves the bad rap he gets, personally and politically, certainly.
Is he going to be a dictator? We hear that from the Democrats a lot.
Well, only on day one, according to him. But I would argue that if you're a dictator on day one, you're probably going to be a dictator on day two and every day after that. It's really hard to, heavy is the head that wears the crown. They don't like to give that power away. They like to say, I'm the benevolent dictator. And so if you got to take him for his word. He'll be a dictator for at least one day. And I think once you do it for one, it's really hard to get off that drug. You'll be a dictator for 2, 3, 4, and on and on and on. So take him at his word.
See, and I think maybe this is why we come back to the initial question that I've asked you so many times. Who would you vote for if you had to vote for one of these two? If you feel you can't win as we get closer to the election, 10 days out, would you want to be known as the person who gave us a dictator? Is that not worse than Kamala Harris, in your opinion?
I don't think I give anybody anything. I think if Trump is elected, it's because the American people elected him. It's not because I gave anybody anything. It's the American people gave us Trump. And I think the American people gave us Trump when they supported him in the Republican primaries. I think they did it again when they supported him in these Republican primaries, even though he didn't participate in one single debate. Let's think about that. The only debate that Donald Trump has participated in is against Joe Biden. He is scared to debate Kamala Harris, I think.
He's scared of that.
I think he is, and I think I think
he's going to do it though.
He's going to, of course. If he had not done it, it would have made him look even worse. But I think he's definitely more afraid of debating Kamala Harris than he is Joe Biden, if for no other reason than Kamala Harris can speak a coherent sentence. It's not praising Kamala Harris. That is damning Joe Biden.
I understand. And just because I know we're getting probably pretty close here on time. It's interesting when you say that somebody most likely is going to be a dictator when they can't put together a coherent sentence, when they are a chaos agent, that they're equally as bad as the other person. That doesn't seem to make any sense, I think, to people listening or watching. Now, I understand why you wouldn't want to say you would vote for one than the other because you're running. I get that. But it just... doesn't seem to balance.
Well, I want to say this. I think already the dictatorship, the dictatorial behavior for the Democratic Party exists. They want to essentially plan everything through the lens of Washington, D.C. They want to control so much of the aspects of your life, how to build your home, how to run your family, how to run your life. And to me, that's already kind of happening. And so when I say take Trump at his word, he's going to be a dictator on day one. The two-party system itself is kind of dictatorial in nature. They kind of control everything. And so for me, it's kind of funny to say, is he going to be a dictator? We've already had dictators. We've already had presidents who basically push what they want through, and they don't really listen to the will of the constituents. They don't really try to work with the other party. It is my way or the highway. And I think that polarization is poisonous.
But I don't think that's what we're saying here when we're saying dictator, referring to Donald Trump. I think we're talking Adolf Hitler. We're not going to leave this office. We're going to try to do away with the Congress and the Senate. We don't want checks and balances. That's how it's being said. We've had nobody who's done that.
Well, I don't think even if Donald Trump gets elected, he's going to do away with the House and the Senate. I think there's too many constitutional guardrails to prevent those things from happening. One of the reasons why I'm proud of us being a constitutional republic, but for me, I just am not satisfied. I'm just not satisfied with what Washington, D.C. brings us, from Democrats or Republicans. And I can say one is a chaos agent, the other one is the status quo. The status quo is just as bad as chaos to me. I don't want to see it. I want to see something different.
Want to see something different? Do you think it will happen?
Yes, in my lifetime, I do think we're going to have a breakthrough. In my lifetime, I do think we're going to have a third-party candidate win the presidency.
Do you think this is the most important election of our lifetime?
No, I think that's said every 4 years. I think every election is an important election, but I've always said, no, this is not the most important election of our lifetime because all of them are, but what this is the most unique election of my lifetime.
If one of these people is elected, are we going to see you there on Inauguration Day?
Probably not. I'm probably going to busy myself with getting back to living a normal life and adjusting to no longer traveling the country being a candidate. But hey, if they want to throw me an invite, who knows? Maybe I'll go there.
Do you think there's going to be trouble if Trump is not elected? Violence trouble?
I don't know. I don't anticipate that. I think if Trump doesn't win, a lot of the MAGA fever is going to break. But I saw James Carville say this, and again, I don't agree with him on a lot of policy, but I think what he said was correct. He was speaking to Dan Crenshaw, and he said, you want, and this was him saying this, he said, you want Kamala to win by like 70 or 80%. You want her to steamroll, because then the party's going to reorganize and get back to more normal. If Kamala wins by 5 electoral votes, your party is effed, is what he said, And that's because they won't crack that MAGA fever. They won't kind of get away from the chaos agent of it all. And so I think, ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen in November. It's going to be a crazy election. The craziest election of our lifetime.
Do you think Donald Trump is for same-sex marriage?
Personally, I think he doesn't care. I think he will go with whatever side he thinks gets him the most votes. But personally, I don't think he cares one way or the other.
And again,
because he's not gay. So if he was, he might care about it.
So do we have to have a gay president for them to care?
For Donald Trump to care, he would have to be gay, I think. But I think most folks can care one way or the other.
See, you took a swipe at him again, and I think that's why people feel maybe deep down you're a little more Harris.
Well, I don't like Kamala Harris either. It's just far easier to swipe at Donald Trump. He's got a long history, even before he was running for office, of being a buffoon.
But people love him.
Yeah,
people love him. There's the thing about Donald Trump that is undeniable. We can say that
Kamala is undeniably, he's entertaining. And I'll say this, before he was president, I still thought he was a bit of a buffoon, but he was entertaining. I liked the Celebrity Apprentice. I liked who are we going to fire, Gary Busey or Meatloaf? Like, that stuff was funny, entertaining. It's great. The problem is when you get the nuclear codes, it doesn't matter how entertaining you are anymore. It becomes, are you going to be a steady hand behind the Resolute desk?
Do you care if Kamala Harris has the nuclear codes?
I'm worried about her too, yes, because I worry about us being driven further and further into war.
Equally worried on everything.
Yeah, well, I am worried about our foreign policy. Here's why I'm worried about the foreign policy with the Democrats, because they are pushing us closer and closer to a war with Iran. And a war with Iran will almost end up having Russia getting involved, and it's only a matter of time before that becomes a nuclear conflict. And so I am worried if Harris wins about nuclear bombs. I'm worried about if Trump wins about nuclear bombs, because I think both of us are pushing us headlong into a crazy war we don't need to be in.
If a gun was pointed to your head, you couldn't mark the ballot for one of these two?
No.
People are equally bad.
I wouldn't vote for either of them.
I understand, but are they equally bad?
Yeah, in my eyes, they're equally disqualified from running for office.
Really?
You hit a threshold, and there's just you're not coming back.
Okay. We got about 90 seconds left here. Well, we got 60 seconds left here. Speak to the voter. Why should they vote for you?
Well, I want you to vote for me because I want you to vote for something different than what we've had our entire lives. I want you to see that there is a broad, principled position that you can hold as a libertarian. You can be as conservative or as progressive as you are personally. Just don't ask that the government push those issues upon you. And the only way you will ever make the Democratic or Republican Party ever be more responsive to you as a voter is you don't give them your vote. Vote outside of it. Make them hurt, make them change for the better. Otherwise, you're going to keep getting less and less, lower and lower quality of candidates, and the lesser of two evils is always evil. Remember this.
The Libertarian candidate for president, Chase Oliver, it has been a pleasure. I'm so glad you were able to come today. It's been great to meet you in person, and I hope we catch up with you before this election's over.
Absolutely.
Hey, for Scott Spears Now, this is Scott Spears heading for the dugout.